So good morning, everybody, and welcome to this webinar organized by WinterMed Project, founded by the Interreg Mediterranean program. The project aim is to make known lessons learned and provide useful tools for supporting tourism sustainability in the Mediterranean island. Today, we are speaking again about the Co-Evolve project, introducing the methodology applied by the project and highlighting the transferability plan document carried out during the Co-Evolve third and final phase, the transferring phase. I said again because we presented another good practice yesterday of this project, and the name is Tourism Sustainability Toolkit. So although these good practices can be also considered separately, I believe that today is an opportunity for those who also followed yesterday webinars to put these good practices into context. The webinar will be recorded, so it will be possible to find it on the project website in the coming days. The duration of the webinar will be around 45 minutes. And I would like to present myself. I am Jasmine Andreaus from Confesercenti Toscana, and I will moderate the webinar today with the help of my colleagues Lorena Vidas from Anci Toscana and Massimiliano Gini from Confesercenti Toscana, who will take care of the webinar coordination. Today's topic will be introduced and discussed by two experts, Ivana Prce from DUNEA, Dubrovnik-Neretva Regional Development Agency, and Veronique. Before giving the word to our expert, I would like to give you some information about how to handle in case of some question arises from your side. And of course, we invite you to ask questions. During the presentation, you can write your question down in the chat box. Question will be collected and discussed in the Q&A session at the end of the webinar. Also during the Q&A, if you want to take the floor, you can click the little handle on the bottom of your screen, and my colleague will turn your micro on for you to intervene. I leave the floor now to Ivana Prce, who will present the Co-Evolve project and its methodology, and Veronique, who will present the transferability plan, and will be also a short review of a pilot experience on the transferability plan. So please. Okay, we see now the screen. Okay, I don't know if you are speaking, but I cannot hear. Hello.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Do you hear me?
Yes, Ivana.
Sorry about technical issues.
Okay, so we cannot see the Ivana picture because she has a technical issue with her camera, but we can hear her.
Thank you, Yasmin. Hello, everybody. Greetings from Dubrovnik. First of all, I would like to apologize, as Jasmine said, because my camera is not working, but at least I can share the screen and you can see the presentation. To break the ice and introduce you with Co-Evolve project, I will just show you a short video about the project.
Okay, Ivana,
Yes, please.
you are there?
Yeah, do you see the presentation?
Yes, we see the presentation. We can see it.
And the video?
No.
Oof.
Maybe we can go through the presentation and we can show the video afterwards.
Yeah, it's okay. It's okay. I'm sorry about this. I thought you can see the video. Yes. So maybe we will show the video later, and now I will go briefly. I will go briefly through the methodology.
Okay.
I want to underline that I'm not an expert in this, but we were in the project. We were just a pilot area, not scientific partner. But maybe it would be interesting to see this from the pilot experience. The methodology of Co-Evolve project consisted of 6 steps. It was planning setup, building knowledge framework, defining vision, goals and objectives, designing the strategy, implementing the plan, and reviewing the plan. First step in our experience was the most important step. It was a planning setup, and the first phase was the identification of needs for tourism-driven strategic planning. Our pilot area was Neretva Valley. It is an area which constructed from 7 units, 5 municipalities and 2 cities. And our goal was to, it is Neretva Valley, it is a very sensitive area. It is Ramsar zone, it's Natura 2000 area with a big biological diversity. So our goal was to achieve sustainable development of tourism by protecting the sensitive coast. So through Co-Evolve project, we wanted to enable construction of tourist facilities in hinterland, in abandoned villages in the hinterland. So the other step was important to define the working team. Our working team was Institute for Spatial Planning of Dubrovnik-Neretva County, external expert and regional development agency DUNEA. The other step, after defining the working team, it was important to define the territorial scope. That is important because it should be an administrative unit for which we will be possible to collect the data. We should be able to find the data that will be a basis to making the studies. Our territorial scope was the whole Neretva Valley, not only villages in the hinterland. The other step was identification of stakeholders. It was very important in Co-Evolve project. Participatory process was very important phase of implementation of the project. And the question should be which stakeholders I must include in the planning phase, why they are very useful, and in which phase. So through Co-Evolve project, we made guidelines for spatial plans. So in the first phase of the planning, it was very important to include policymakers. So we made series of meetings with mayors of cities and municipalities in Neretva, just to introduce them what will be made through the project, and to be sure that after the guidelines will be, when we finalize the guidelines, that they will include them in their spatial plans. After the identification of stakeholders and including them in the planning process, we made the work plan and defined the milestones. Then the first step of implementation of the project was building knowledge framework. It consisted on 3 important steps. First one was data collection. And then after collecting the data which will be important to the guidelines, then that data should be analyzed. Analyzation of collected data is a very important step to obtain a knowledge framework which will be useful to construct planning priorities and subsequent goals and objectives. Next step was, after analyzing the data collection, to review the collected data with technical stakeholders. This is just to show you which data we collected and information provided. After the building knowledge framework phase, next step was defining vision, goals, and objectives, with the main focus to set the main planning directions. It consisted from 2 phases: designing a common and integrated vision for the area, with the question, what is desired or intended future of the coastal area in terms of strategic and sustainable tourism development. And here you can see a few guidelines which will said how to create a vision. After creating the vision, then we identify the main planning goals and objectives. And finally, step 3 was the main step. It's designing the strategy. It should be a logical output of the preceding steps of the process. After designing the strategy, then a strategy should become a practical program or activity for implementation. And step 6 is reviewing the plan. So after the implementation of the project, we created guidelines for integral rural landscape protection of tourism development of the Neretva River Delta. And we created planning guidelines for reconstruction of the villages in the hinterland of Neretva River Delta. And now we are in the phase of reviewing the plan. We are in constant communication with mayors of municipalities in Neretva Valley, and we are following implementation of our guidelines in their spatial plans. That's it from me for now. Thank you.
Thank you, Ivana. Thank you, Ivana.
So, hi, can you hear me? Yes?
Yes, Veronique.
Yes, okay, so I will start sharing my screen and I will put you then the video which is explaining the whole project very nicely, which has been made by our partner CRPM. I hope it will work. So, can you see my, share, okay, that's it. Okay, so.
We cannot hear the audio.
Okay.
But we can see the video.
Okay, so if there is no audio, it's better I quit. Okay, then we won't see the presentation. it's a pity because that would have been quite useful to see it. But anyway, I can explain you very shortly. It is in my presentation, I have a part which is actually speaking about the goals of CoEvolve, but it's a little bit later. So building on Ivana's presentation, I will maybe start explaining directly the transferability and go back a little bit later on CoEvolve goals, if it's okay for you. So my name is Veronique Evers, actually not Everts, so it's a S at the end, but it's you know, okay for me to be Evert today.
Sorry for that mistake.
Yeah, it's, you know, it's really okay. And I'm a project officer at Paprec. Paprec was one of the institutional partners of CoEvolve. And I will be quite short in my presentation because I guess, you know, what was probably the most important for you was to hear about the methodology that Ivana presented in her institutional experience. So I will talk to you rather shortly about our transferability plan. When we wanted to transfer the results of the project, we wanted to do it at two levels. So the first level was the national level, and the second one, the Mediterranean level. At the national level, the objective was to transfer the CoEvolve experience with the lessons learned and the good practices to other regions and municipalities. So it was done with the neighboring, usually very often regions and municipalities. Even though in the framework of CoEvolve, the level of the authorities was the nuts tree, sometimes because the pilot area were not always taking the whole superficie of the region, then sometimes the experience was transmitted to other municipalities. When the experience was transferred at the national level, that was done through the participation of the pilot areas, which made their own transferability plan. We, as Paprec, we were responsible for the transferability at the Mediterranean level. Our goal was actually to transfer the experience to the countries which didn't participate to the project, and especially to the southern countries of the region. You will actually, when you will see the film later on, you will see that there is a follow-up project, which name is CoEvolve for Blue Growth, which is now implemented in order to replicate the experience in countries such as Lebanon and Tunisia and other countries which were not involved. So to give you in a few words to explain you why Paprec was the institution that was in charge with the transferability of the results, I will just explain you what Paprec is doing. So there is in 1977, there was a convention that was adopted, which is the Barcelona Convention for the Protection of the Marine Environment and Coastal Regions of the Mediterranean. There are 22 states which are contracting parties to the convention. These states, they are actually in colors on the card, plus the European Union. And our mandate is to help the contracting parties to implement the protocol on integrated coastal zone management. Actually, we want to help them to improve the sustainability of their coastal zones. So this is mainly why we were the institution responsible for sharing our experience in the Mediterranean. What did we expect from the transferability plans? So first of all, we expect that through these transferability plans, we will strengthen the results of CoEvolve. We expect that these results will lead to real changes and that it won't only stay documents in the drawers. I hope maybe during the discussion, maybe Ivana will have a possibility to explain you how the results of CoEvolve had an impact on the situation in her pilot area, because they actually, when they did their plan, it served like a base for the revision of their land use plan. So I hope Ivana will say a word about it later. Secondly, what we expected is a large-scale dissemination, because those plans, they were, as you understood, they were presented to other regions of the same country, and they were also presented abroad. And finally, we expect that the transfer of results will improve innovation practices and policies. Now, I will very shortly just give you an overview. You know, this is just the table of content of our transferability plan, so we can speak a little bit more about it in the further slides. So for the background, that's a sentence that you should have heard in the film that was planned to be shown. And this is actually the goal of co-evolve. The sentence goes like this. So co-evolve aims at analyzing and promoting the co-evolution of human activities and natural systems in touristic coastal areas, allowing sustainable development of touristic activities based on the principles of integrated coastal zone management and maritime spatial planning. So maybe this sentence is really clear for you, but in my case, it wasn't very clear. So I will just go a little bit, try to ease it up and see what we actually meant by this. What we actually tried to do in Co-Evolve, it was not only to favor a more sustainable tourism, but generally to improve the sustainability of the whole touristic destination. So its focus was wider than usually when we are making a strategy for the development of tourism, or it was also wider than usually the projects I'm getting into contact to through the transversal projects. Like it could be that actually in WinterMed, your projects, they are a little bit more targeted than this one, because this one was rather wide. What we tried to do, it was to really consider the pilot area in an integrated way. All the pilot areas, they were on the sea. So we tried to take into account all the major issues that are encountered in the Mediterranean coastal zone. And not only on the land parts, because we are also trying always to consider the marine parts. So it was so there was maybe some thematics that were present in Co-Evolve project, which are not always taken into account when we are making a tourism strategy. Like, for example, we tried to take into account the land-sea interactions or the conflicts in uses in the maritime space. That's all, you know, something that is quite unusual in the context of tourism development strategy. What were the main outputs of Co-Evolve at the Mediterranean level? The first main output was the analysis of threats and enabling factors. As I explained you a little bit before, we tried to take into account many of the thematics. So we had on one side the threats, which were littoralization and urbanization, pollution and other anthropogenic pressures affecting ecosystems, conflicts among different uses on land and at sea, and land-sea interaction, climate change and morphological stability, touristic fluxes and carrying capacity. On the other hand, we had the enabling factors, which were ecosystems protection, transport and accessibility, coastal protection measures, and water supply and depuration. And as a, let's say, transversal thematic, we had the policies and governance. What was very interesting for us in the framework of this project was that the pilot areas, they had to give us information regarding all these thematics. So they had to take them into account in their planning, as they had to provide information for our database. So I guess this probably helped to really get to this integrated overview of the situation. The second important output at the Mediterranean level was the indicator toolbox. As I understood from Jasmine, you already had the presentation on the indicators, so I won't go deep inside, definitely. In case somebody didn't attend this presentation, I'll just mention that there were different kind of indicators. You have a scheme on the side. So there were like core indicators, which were 40 of them, and selected among the European tourism indicator system. You had the destination indicators, which were developed to address the issues according to the destination type. We had 6 different types of destinations: beach and maritime, urban and cultural, cruising, recreational, boating, and nature tourism. That makes maybe only 5. Now I'm counting better. And finally, you had the pilot area specific indicators, which were indicators that pilot area were proposing themselves in order to have something really tailor-made for the pilot area. Okay, I won't go back on the methodology, which was presented by Ivana. So I just pass on this slide and go to the chapter 2, which are the results from the pilot area experiences. So which were the main results? First of all, I have to mention that we started from extremely heterogeneous baseline situations and also ambitions. Now you can see here, for example, that we're 2 pilot areas. So on the right side, you have the Valencia port. Valencia is a town of 2 million people. And on the other side, you have the Castella port, which is a town of 40,000 inhabitants. So of course, that was really very different scales, and it wasn't easy to have such different scales in one project. And of course, the objectives were very different. Like, for example, in Castella, the objective was to make an integrated coastal plan, which would take fully into account the climate change and which would help them discover which were the main vulnerability of their coastal zone and so on. While in Valencia, the point was to build a model to measure the economic impact of cruise tourism in the local destination. So of course, the reason is also that the scale were so different that it would be unrealistic to expect to make an integrated coastal plan for the whole region of Valencia, while it was feasible in the Castella case. As Ivana mentioned a little bit earlier, a very strong accent was put on the participatory process, and it requested a lot of flexibility from the responsible authorities. As it happens often in projects, when the project was written, it happened that when it got in contact with reality through the participatory process, it didn't really fit the expectations of the stakeholders. We had a very good example. In France, there was a department called Hérault. When they planned their participation in Co-Evolve, they thought that they would make a coastal plan, and also with the focus on the climate change. And when they arrived and presented it at the first meeting, the stakeholders said that they clearly didn't want from another strategy, that there were too many strategies and documents, and they were really eager actually to have more concrete actions. So it was decided, and the Co-Evolve Management Authority was very flexible of it, that they would narrow the focus of their action, and that they would go in 3 individual themes that were much more concrete. And they decided to develop a methodology for calculating the loss of the coastline due to erosion, another methodology to calculate the carrying capacity of the region, and finally, to develop a strategy for sustainable mobility. That's when you're combining the ecological transports, such as bicycle or scooters. And we had actually at the end great results achieved, which took fully into account the local needs. Nevertheless, we encountered difficulties. Probably our main difficulty, there was two actually main difficulties, but it was actually very difficult to get to the data that were needed. As Ivana spoke about it shortly a little bit before, we had a very high number of indicators, as you saw in the previous slides, and some of the data we are not available, nor on the NUTS3 level, but even less on when you looked at the local level. This was very complicated. So as you see on here, you have 35% of the data that were not available at all. You only had 36% of the data which were available at destination level, and that was because in this case the destination level corresponded to municipality levels or to other administrative boundaries, and then there is already data available at this level. So it was quite a challenge. So one of the main conclusions that we came to solve this problem was to consider having expert evaluations, which would have a real weight in the project. That means if you don't have data available, you can ask experts to give you an estimation of what the data could be, and this could be a starting point for evaluation of the sustainability of the indicator later on. The other difficulty that we were confronted to was the difficulty to mobilize the stakeholders. As it was the case in ERO, and as I mentioned a little bit before, in some areas, the stakeholders, they are very solicited and they already participated to the elaboration of many plans and many strategies and so on. So there is often an impression that they are not really influencing the process and that their opinions are not taken fully into account. The solution we proposed, which is not so innovative, but we wanted to actually emphasize it, is to include the stakeholders from the very beginning of the process. This means already when you are making the analysis of the baseline situation, so that you can take adequately into account their opinion and you can already start designing the plan together with them. And finally, I won't speak about it a lot because that's probably not so much in the focus of what is interesting for you. But we transfer the results of CoEvolve at different scales. So we had different meetings, and we have now this new project starting, which will transfer the results of CoEvolve in the south of the Mediterranean. We also have a transfer through our MedOpen online course, which is the Paprec virtual training course. And we have the institution that participated in CoEvolve, which name is CPMR, which also they are the author of the video that you were supposed to be in to see and you didn't see. And through their knowledge and expertise, they are participating to transfer the results. Okay, so that's Ivana's presentation because we switched actually the order of the presentation, and I guess I'm open for any question if you have.
Thank you, Veronique.
I will be sharing my screen, right?
Yes.
Okay, that's it.
Yes, okay, thank you. Thank you, Veronique, and thank you also to Ivana for the presentation, because the Altered Go project, the CoEvolve project, sorry, has really useful tools, which are rightly complex, but in my opinion, you have made clear. So we can say that the potential of this methodology is that it can be declined and adapted to different territories, and that the experiments in the pilots have also brought good results. Is that right? Can you make some example, for instance, some good example
Yeah, I would like,
So
you know,
some
if it's
pilot,
possible, I would like to hear Ivana, because as I mentioned a little bit earlier, I think they have one of the best, actually, good practice that we can mention, because it's quite rare that something that we are planning goes directly into the land use planning, right? This is a great example.
Yes.
Ivana?
Do you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Yeah, through the project, we made guidelines for integral protection of rural landscape and sustainable development of tourism. That included planning and architectural guidelines for the revitalization of rural settlements. So I think we did a very great job when including the decision makers. As Veronique said, at the beginning of the project, we included them in the planning phase. And when we started to implementing the project, we held a series of meetings with mayors and of municipalities and cities from Neretva Valley and introduced them with the project. And then we when we were in the phase of implementation of the project, we always we had a very good communication with them and explained them why is that very important to include in landscape plan. And maybe as Veronique said, we should identify who are our main stakeholders and include them at the beginning of the project. And in transferring phase of the project, we held a final conference in Dubrovnik where our county prefect presented the guidelines and recommended mayors and from the municipalities and cities to include them in the landscape plan, which was successful because they did.
Okay, thank you. This is very interesting. So now I will pass to the question and answer session. And so let's see if we have some questions from the attendees. Just a communication for the attendees. I think that my colleague Massimiliano Gini, he switched you as panelists in order to interact better. And yes, let's see if there is some questions. So, there is a question from Christina. So, how you motivated local stakeholders to participate in the creation of the strategy? What was their reaction to the topic? Will they use the results, for example, indicators in the planning of future actions? I don't know who of you want to answer to these questions.
And I guess maybe Ivana, because I didn't, you know, directly participate to the participatory process.
Yeah.
Okay.
As I already said, our main local stakeholders were the policymakers. And we held a series of meetings with them, but also we motivated local population. We had a very, very big media campaign and held 4 workshops with local population, because in the guidelines we created, they didn't include only planning guidelines. Also, it also had guidelines for the restoration of traditional architecture, what was very interesting to local population, because we gave them guidelines how to construct their traditional houses. And it was we had like 40 or 50 people from Neretva Valley who attended our workshops.
Okay. Let's see if there is another question for you. Yes, from my colleague Massimiliano Gini. what were the main difficulties in transferring the project to other areas of the Mediterranean?
Okay, so as Paprec, I cannot really speak about difficulties because we mainly presented the project, so that was like, it was globally very nicely welcome. Nevertheless, we had the chance to attend to the first meeting of the new project, which name is Co-Evolve for Blue Growth, and to see how the experience was perceived in the southern countries. And it appeared that the main problem at that time, which was the very beginning of the project, regarded the data, because already here in the northern countries, we already, as you saw, we already had problem to collect data, and especially also of the scale of the data. And when you go on the south, you really have huge leakage of information, so it's extremely hard to apply the sustainability toolbox, and even it's not always easy to have the expert opinion on it, because sometimes you're really on a ground where you don't have any information to base your opinion. So so I guess this is one of the main problems that will be encountered when transferring the project. And of course, we are always speaking about the importance of this participatory process. And it's true that generally in northern countries, not in all of them, but in many of them, we have already a tradition of participation and so on, which is not there everywhere. So it is not always so easy to have the inputs of the stakeholders, and also it is not always easy to build on them.
Okay, thank you. Yes, let's see. Another questions. What are the economic and human resources necessary for an effective transfer?
So again, our transfer has been done through an existing structure, because we had this conference of the contracting parties to the Barcelona Convention, where we had an opportunity to present to all the countries of the Mediterranean the Co-Evolve project. We also have the Med-Open course, which is also meant for the entire Mediterranean, and which is a bias how Paprec can have a larger public and a wider transferability. If your question is maybe to know, I don't really have the answer to this question, but I would probably orientate the efforts to contact these institutions which already have a Mediterranean web network. I think that's the easiest way and the most economic way to ensure an effective transfer. That wasn't through us, Paprec, but that was also done through the CPRM, which are very present on the Mediterranean level. And also the next project, Co-Evolve for Blue Growth, got validated by the Union for the Mediterranean, which is also a way to ensure a good transferability. So that's probably the easiest and most efficient way to ensure the transfer.
Okay. I have a question also, because you, in the transferability plan, Co-Evolve transferability plan, you had made the transferability in a local scale and in a wider scale.
Yeah.
What about the local scale? You are in contact with the neighborhood, pilot area, stakeholders. How you will make this transfer?
So inside the project, the pilot areas had the obligation to organize 2 meetings. One of them could be organized inside the region, so the experience could be transferred like in another municipality or something like this. But they had also the obligation to make it like transboundary replication, in the sense of to go beyond the boundaries of their region. So they had the obligation to invite representatives of another region in order to present them their outputs. And that's how we see many of the meetings were organized back to some other meeting in order to gather more easily the responsible authorities, right?
Okay, and do you collect a positive feedback from the neighborhood?
Yeah, we've collected generally positive feedback, but I think, you know, it's still quite early because the project ended not such a long time ago. So I think with the time we will probably maybe see better the results. And also, of course, when there is a follow-up project, you see better results than when the regions are left by themselves. So that's, we are always in the same logic.
Okay, thank you for this intervention, for your answers.
Thank you.
I would like to just underline what you have said about the indicator solution. So I liked a lot this solution phase about the indicator and also the stakeholders. So about the indicator, Coeval suggests to consider to have expert evaluations, and about the stakeholder, it needs to include them from the very beginning of the process. This is really important for the, I think, for the participatory process. And yeah, so I think that we finished with the question now. There aren't any questions, I think. Let's check in the chat box. No. So maybe we can finish with this webinar, and I thank you, our experts, for their support and their availability today, and I thank you also to all the attendees that are here. And yes, we will have another webinar, which will be on 22 of June, so this Monday, about the Meetobet Plus project. The webinar will call Implementing the Sustainable Destination Management Model in the Pilot Areas. So the webinar, you will receive the invitation for this webinar, and next week we will have also other two webinars, one on 24th of June and the other one on 29th of June. You will receive all the information, and if you want to subscribe to this webinar, you can find some information and the button to the link here. I will give you the link. Okay, this is the WinterMed project link, so you will find all the information in this link. I put it in the chat box. So thank you again for everybody, and I say goodbye to you for today.
Okay,
Bye.
thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Thank you very much. Bye-bye.